Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to reflect on one of the most defining moments in European history. The Battle of Waterloo took place on June 18, 1815, on a battlefield near Waterloo, a small village located in present-day Belgium, approximately 15 kilometers, 9 miles south of Brussels. This battle was the climactic conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars, a series of major conflicts that had engulfed Europe for over a decade. The choice of the battlefield was strategic. Wellington selected the site because of its natural defensive advantages. Rolling hills and ridges allowed his forces to take up strong positions and shield themselves from direct artillery fire. The location also enabled him to establish communication with his Prussian allies under Field Marshal Blücher, who were marching to join him. The day itself began under challenging conditions. Heavy rain had fallen the night before, turning the fields of Waterloo into a muddy quagmire. This had a profound impact on the course of the battle. Napoleon, known for his aggressive and swift military tactics, was forced to delay the start of his attack until mid-morning to allow the ground to dry. This delay proved critical, as it gave the Prussian forces more time to approach and reinforce Wellington's army. The battlefield itself became a stage for fierce and relentless combat. It stretched across roughly 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles, with 3 key positions playing a crucial role: Hougomont, a fortified farmhouse on the right; La Haye-Sainte, a farmhouse in the center; and Papelotte, on the left flank. Each of these locations became a site of intense fighting, with control of these positions shifting multiple times throughout the day. By evening, the landscape was marked by the devastating effects of war. Thousands of soldiers lay dead or wounded on the blood-soaked fields. The small village of Waterloo, which had been a quiet agricultural community, became forever etched into history as the site of one of the most significant and decisive battles ever fought. The echoes of this day would reverberate across Europe, reshaping its political and social landscape for generations to come. The Battle of Waterloo was fought between two opposing forces, Napoleon Bonaparte's French army and the Seventh Coalition, a multinational alliance determined to end Napoleon's reign once and for all. This coalition was led by Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, commanding a mixed Allied army, and Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, leading the Prussian forces. Each side brought unique strengths, strategies, and historical legacies to the battlefield, making the encounter a clash not only of armies, but also of empires and ideologies. Napoleon's French army. Napoleon's Armée du Nord, Army of the North, was a formidable force, numbering approximately 73,000 soldiers, including 48,000 infantry, 14,000 cavalry, and 11,000 artillery troops. Despite being hastily assembled after his return from exile on Elba, this army was composed of battle-hardened veterans and included some of the most elite units in European warfare. Among these were Napoleon's Imperial Guard, an elite corps considered invincible, renowned for their loyalty and fearlessness. Napoleon himself was a military genius who had revolutionized the art of war through speed, flexibility, and decisive action. His strategy at Waterloo was characteristic of his past triumphs. He aimed to strike quickly and divide the enemy forces before they could fully unite. Although he was facing two major armies, Napoleon believed that by defeating Wellington first, he could prevent the Prussians from arriving in time. This confidence was built on years of success across Europe, where his tactical brilliance had earned him the reputation of being unbeatable on the battlefield. However, the French army faced significant challenges. Many of Napoleon's most experienced marshals were either absent or hesitant. His key subordinates at Waterloo included Marshal Michel Ney, known for his courage but criticized for his indecisiveness during this battle, and Marshal Emmanuel de Grouchy, whose delayed pursuit of the Prussians would prove disastrous. Furthermore, the army's morale, while high due to Napoleon's return, was fragile due to the speed of its assembly and the exhaustion caused by constant marching. The Seventh Coalition. Opposing Napoleon was the Seventh Coalition, a grand alliance formed by several European powers determined to stop Napoleon's resurgence. At Waterloo, two primary armies from this coalition faced the French, the Anglo-Allied army under Wellington and the Prussian army under Blücher. Together, these forces totaled approximately 118,000 soldiers, giving the coalition a numerical advantage, although their coordination and communication posed logistical challenges. The Anglo-Allied army comprised approximately 68,000 troops, drawn from across the British Empire and its European allies, including soldiers from Britain, the Netherlands, Hanover, Brunswick, and Nassau. This army was diverse and included both experienced British regulars and newly recruited European forces. Wellington, a seasoned commander known for his defensive strategies, had fought successfully against Napoleon's marshals during the Peninsular War in Spain. His approach at Waterloo was defensive. He positioned his forces on a ridge, using the natural terrain to protect his infantry from French artillery bombardment. The Prussian army, led by Field Marshal Blücher, was another crucial component of the 7th Coalition. Despite being 72 years old, Blücher's leadership was characterized by boldness and determination. His force of 50,000 Prussian soldiers had been defeated at Ligny just 2 days earlier, but managed to regroup and march toward Waterloo. Their timely arrival late in the afternoon would tip the balance of the battle. The cooperation between Wellington and Blücher was a testament to diplomatic and military coordination, despite language barriers and differing military philosophies. Wellington relied on the Prussians to provide reinforcements, while Blücher counted on Wellington to hold his ground until the Prussians could strike Napoleon's right flank. This collaboration was essential to their shared goal, the total defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte. The Battle of Waterloo was not just a confrontation between two armies, it was a showdown between two ways of life. Napoleon represented the ideals of military expansion, personal ambition, and revolutionary change, while the coalition stood for traditional monarchies, stability, and the restoration of Europe's old order. Each side believed they were fighting for the future of the continent, making the stakes at Waterloo nothing less than the destiny of Europe itself. The Battle of Waterloo was the dramatic conclusion to a series of events that began with Napoleon Bonaparte's return from exile and his attempt to reclaim power over France and Europe. To fully understand the significance of this battle, it is crucial to explore the historical context leading to it, specifically Napoleon's fall from power, his escape from exile, and the rapid mobilization of the 7th Coalition determined to stop him. Napoleon's fall from power, 1814. By 1814, after more than a decade of near-continuous warfare across Europe, Napoleon's empire was crumbling. Following a series of devastating defeats, most notably the catastrophic Russian campaign, 1812, and the loss at the Battle of Leipzig, 1813, the combined forces of the 6th Coalition invaded France itself. Under relentless pressure from these allied powers, including Britain, Prussia, Russia, and Austria, Napoleon was forced to abdicate the French throne on April 6, 1814. In recognition of his past achievements and to avoid a prolonged conflict, the Allies exiled Napoleon to the small Mediterranean island of Elba, located off the coast of Italy. He was granted the title of Emperor of Elba and allowed to maintain a small personal guard, but his political and military ambitions appeared to be finished. Meanwhile, the French monarchy was restored under King Louis XVIII, a member of the Bourbon dynasty. Many in Europe believed that Napoleon's reign had come to a permanent and definitive end. The return from Elba, the 100 Days. Yet Napoleon was far from defeated in spirit. Life on Elba proved both frustrating and humiliating for a man who had once ruled over much of Europe. Observing the growing discontent in France toward King Louis XVIII's unpopular government and recognizing the loyalty many in the French army still held for him, Napoleon saw an opportunity to reclaim his empire. On February 26, 1815, he escaped Elba with a small group of loyal followers and landed on the southern coast of France on March 1, 1815. In a remarkable and daring campaign known as the 100 Days, Napoleon marched north toward Paris, gathering support as he advanced. In a dramatic moment near Grenoble, he confronted a battalion sent to arrest him. Approaching the soldiers, he declared, "If there is one among you who wishes to kill his emperor, here I am." Instead of capturing him, the soldiers cheered and joined his cause. As he advanced, thousands of troops defected from the royalist government to Napoleon's banner. On March 20, 1815, Napoleon entered Paris without firing a shot, and King Louis XVIII fled into exile. Once again, Napoleon was Emperor of France. The formation of the Seventh Coalition. Napoleon's return sent shockwaves through Europe. The powers that had defeated him only a year earlier, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, immediately recognized the threat he posed. Determined to prevent him from destabilizing the continent again, they formed the Seventh Coalition and vowed to remove Napoleon from power permanently. Rather than wait for the coalition to strike, Napoleon decided to take the offensive. His goal was to defeat the Allied forces in Belgium before their armies could unite. The primary threats he faced were the Anglo-Allied army, led by the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussian army, commanded by Field Marshal Blücher. If Napoleon could destroy these two armies, he believed the other coalition powers, Austria and Russia, would hesitate to continue the war, allowing him to consolidate power once again. Napoleon swiftly gathered an army of 125,000 men, known as the Armée du Nord, Army of the North, and marched toward Belgium in June 1815. His strategy was simple yet bold: divide and conquer. He planned to strike between the Anglo-Allied and Prussian armies, preventing them from combining their forces. On June 16th, he achieved partial success by defeating Blücher at the Battle of Ligny, forcing the Prussians to retreat. However, at the same time, Marshal Ney fought the Anglo-Allied army at the Battle of Quatre-Bras, where Wellington held his position and delayed the French advance. Although victorious at Ligny, Napoleon's failure to completely destroy the Prussian army would prove to be a critical mistake. Blücher, despite being injured, was determined to regroup and march toward Wellington's position at Waterloo. Meanwhile, Napoleon pursued Wellington, who fell back to a defensive ridge south of the village of Waterloo. By the evening of June 17th, both armies were in position. The stage was set for one of the most significant battles in European history, a battle that would determine whether Napoleon's return to power would be permanent or whether the coalition could finally put an end to his ambitions. As dawn broke on June 18, 1815, Napoleon believed he was on the brink of another great victory. Yet, on those rain-soaked fields of Waterloo, the fate of Europe would soon be decided in blood and battle. The Battle of Waterloo was not just a clash of armies, it was a contest of military strategy, where the decisions made before and during the battle shaped its outcome. Napoleon Bonaparte, renowned for his tactical brilliance, sought to use his well-honed methods of speed, deception, and decisive action to defeat the Seventh Coalition before their combined forces could overwhelm him. His plan was bold yet risky: divide and conquer, a strategy that had brought him victory many times before. However, against the combined leadership of the Duke of Wellington and Field Marshal Blücher, even Napoleon's genius would be tested to its limits. Napoleon's strategy. Napoleon's overarching plan for the campaign was to strike quickly and prevent the Allied forces from uniting. He recognized that if the armies of Britain and Prussia combined with the other coalition forces, including Austria and Russia, France would be surrounded and overwhelmed. To prevent this, Napoleon advanced into Belgium with approximately 125,000 soldiers and aimed to defeat the Anglo-Allied and Prussian armies in rapid succession. His strategy relied on speed and surprise. By moving quickly, he hoped to catch the coalition forces off guard and drive a wedge between them. If he could destroy one army before the other could arrive, he would not only reduce the immediate threat but also demoralize the rest of the coalition and possibly force a negotiated peace. Napoleon divided his Armée du Nord into three main forces. Left wing, led by Marshal Ney, tasked with engaging and delaying Wellington's Anglo-Allied forces. Right wing, commanded by Marshal Grouchy, ordered to pursue and prevent the Prussian army from rejoining the fight. Central Reserve, led by Napoleon himself, including the elite Imperial Guard, ready to strike the decisive blow. On June 16, 1815, Napoleon achieved a tactical victory at the Battle of Ligny, where he defeated the Prussians and forced them to retreat. However, he failed to destroy Blücher's army completely. At the same time, Ney engaged Wellington at Quatre-Bras but did not prevent the Anglo-Allied army from withdrawing north to the defensive ridge near Waterloo. These partial successes meant that both enemy forces remained intact, an outcome that would prove disastrous for Napoleon's overall strategy. Wellington's defensive strategy. The Duke of Wellington was known as a master of defensive warfare, having perfected his tactics during the Peninsular War against Napoleon's marshals. At Waterloo, he chose a defensive position on a ridge south of the village. This location was carefully selected to maximize his strengths and mitigate the French advantages in cavalry and artillery. Wellington positioned his 68,000-strong army along the reverse slope of the ridge, a tactic he often used to shield his troops from French artillery fire. This positioning also allowed his infantry to stay hidden until the enemy advanced, creating opportunities for surprise volleys at close range. The ridge itself was flanked by three key defensive strongholds. Hougoumont Farm, a fortified chateau on Wellington's right flank. This was manned by British and German troops who were ordered to hold the position at all costs. It served as an anchor point and drew repeated French attacks throughout the day. La Haye Sainte, a farmhouse in the center of Wellington's line, garrisoned by King's German Legion troops. Controlling this position was critical to protecting the Anglo-Allied center. Peyplate and Fritremont, located on Wellington's left, these villages guarded the road from Wavre, where Blücher's Prussian forces were expected to arrive. Wellington's strategy was simple but demanding: hold the line until the Prussians arrived to tip the balance. His defensive posture was calculated to absorb the shock of Napoleon's assaults while buying time for reinforcements. Knowing that the Prussians had promised to march to his aid, Wellington's confidence rested on maintaining his position long enough for Blücher's arrival. Blücher's strategy and the Prussian role. After their defeat at Ligny, the Prussians under Field Marshal Blücher did not retreat eastward, as Napoleon had expected, but instead moved north toward Wavre, keeping open the possibility of supporting Wellington. Despite sustaining heavy casualties, Blücher was determined to re-engage Napoleon and fulfill his promise to support the Anglo-Allied army. Blücher's strategy was bold and risky. The Prussian army, though battered and disorganized, committed to marching through difficult terrain and muddy roads to reach Waterloo. This decision was critical because, without Prussian intervention, Wellington's army would likely have been overwhelmed by Napoleon's superior numbers. On the day of the battle, Blücher's forces, led by General Bülow, began arriving on Napoleon's right flank in the afternoon. This forced Napoleon to divert resources to meet the new threat, weakening his main assaults against Wellington. Key tactical decisions during the battle. Napoleon's delayed attack. Due to heavy rain the night before, Napoleon delayed his initial assault until late morning to allow the ground to dry. This delay was costly. It gave the Prussians more time to advance toward the battlefield. The attack on Hougoumont. Napoleon believed capturing Hougoumont would destabilize Wellington's right flank. He committed thousands of troops to the assault, but the defenders held firm throughout the day, tying down a significant portion of the French army. The massed cavalry charges. In the afternoon, Marshal Ney launched a series of massive cavalry attacks against Wellington's center. However, these charges were poorly coordinated and repelled by infantry squares, resulting in heavy French losses without breaking the Anglo-Allied line. Grouchy's failure to block the Prussians. Napoleon had ordered Marshal Grouchy to pursue the retreating Prussians and prevent them from joining Wellington. However, Grouchy moved too slowly and failed to intercept Blücher, allowing the Prussians to arrive at Waterloo. The Imperial Guard's final attack. As evening approached, Napoleon deployed his Imperial Guard, his most elite and trusted troops, in a last desperate attempt to break Wellington's center. For the first time in their history, the Guard was repelled, signaling the collapse of the French army. Strategic miscalculations. While Napoleon's overall plan was sound in theory, several miscalculations proved fatal. Underestimating Prussian resilience. Napoleon assumed Blücher's forces would retreat far from the battlefield after Ligny, but they recovered quickly and arrived in force. Over-reliance on Ney and Grouchy. Both marshals failed in their objectives. Ney could not break Wellington's lines, and Grouchy failed to block the Prussians. The timing of attacks. Delays in the morning and poor coordination in the afternoon allowed the Allies to outlast and outmaneuver the French army. Ultimately, while Napoleon hoped to repeat the brilliant victories of his past campaigns, the strategic coordination between Wellington and Blücher and a series of critical errors on the French side led to one of the most decisive defeats of his career. The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, unfolded over a tense and bloody day marked by shifting momentum, intense combat, and crucial decisions made by both sides. The battle began in the late morning and continued into the evening, with the fate of Europe hanging in the balance. Each phase of the battle reflected the broader strategies of Napoleon, Wellington, and Blücher, while also revealing the chaos and brutality of 19th-century warfare. Morning. The battle begins, 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. The battle commenced later than Napoleon had intended due to heavy rain the previous night, which had turned the fields of Waterloo into a muddy expanse. This delay, an unusual hesitation for the typically aggressive Napoleon, gave the Prussian army under Field Marshal Blücher more time to regroup and begin their march toward the battlefield. Napoleon's first objective was to break Wellington's defensive line and prevent the two Allied forces from combining. Napoleon's opening move focused on Hougoumont, a fortified chateau and farm complex on Wellington's right flank. He believed capturing it would unbalance the Anglo-Allied position and open the door for a larger assault. At 11:30 a.m., the French launched an intense attack on the position, led by Prince Jerome Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. However, the British and Allied defenders of Hougoumont, primarily British Guards regiments, were well prepared and fiercely determined. Despite repeated assaults throughout the day, the defenders held the position. The fighting around Hougoumont became a bitter and symbolic struggle. Napoleon continued to pour resources into this attack, but the position never fell, tying up thousands of French troops who might have been used elsewhere on the battlefield. Midday, the assault on La Haye-Sainte, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. While Hougoumont raged on, Napoleon shifted his focus to La Haye-Sainte, a farmhouse located at the center of Wellington's line. Capturing it was vital because it offered a clear path to break through the Anglo-Allied center. At around 1 p.m., Napoleon ordered Marshal Ney to lead a mass infantry assault against Wellington's positions, concentrating on this key stronghold. Thousands of French infantrymen, organized into massive columns, advanced up the ridge under heavy musket fire and artillery bombardment. The King's German Legion garrisoned inside La Haye-Sainte fiercely resisted these waves of attacks. Despite sustaining heavy casualties, the Anglo-Allied lines held, largely due to Wellington's use of the ridge. His troops were positioned on the reverse slope, which protected them from direct artillery fire. During this phase, Napoleon also unleashed his Grand Battery, a mass concentration of artillery positioned on higher ground. These 80 cannons pounded Wellington's center relentlessly, causing significant casualties. Despite the bombardment and repeated attacks, the Anglo-Allied line refused to break, reflecting Wellington's skill in maintaining a disciplined defensive posture. Afternoon, Ney's cavalry charges, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. By the late afternoon, with the French infantry unable to make a breakthrough, Marshal Ney believed that Wellington's army was on the verge of collapse. Without direct orders from Napoleon, Ney took the initiative and launched a series of massive cavalry charges, one of the most famous and controversial moments of the battle. Over 12,000 French cavalrymen stormed up the ridge toward the Anglo-Allied lines. Ney's goal was to overwhelm Wellington's weakened forces and drive them from the battlefield. However, Wellington anticipated this move and had ordered his infantry to form squares, a defensive formation highly effective against cavalry. These squares, bristling with bayonets, repelled charge after charge. Despite repeated attacks, the cavalry could not break the squares. The French suffered heavy losses, and Ney's misjudgment had catastrophic consequences. The cavalry charges exhausted much of Napoleon's reserves without achieving their objective, leaving the French vulnerable as the day wore on. Evening. The Prussian arrival and the final assault, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. As the battle reached the evening, the tide began to turn decisively against Napoleon. At around 4:30 p.m., the first Prussian forces under General Bülow arrived on Napoleon's right flank near the village of Plancenoit. This was a critical moment. Napoleon had counted on Marshal Grouchy to block the Prussians, but Grouchy's slow pursuit left the French exposed. Napoleon quickly sent reinforcements to Plancenoit, including Young Guard and Old Guard units, to hold off the Prussian advance. The fighting in Plancenoit was vicious and chaotic, as both sides knew the village's fate could determine the battle's outcome. Although the French temporarily recaptured the village, the Prussian pressure continued to mount throughout the evening. By 7 p.m., Napoleon realized that time was running out. With the Prussians attacking his flank and Wellington's line still holding strong, he made one final gamble. He committed his Imperial Guard, his most elite and battle-hardened soldiers, in a last attempt to break through Wellington's center. The Imperial Guard marched up the ridge under heavy fire. For a moment, it seemed as if Napoleon's boldest warriors might succeed. But as they crested the ridge, they were met by a devastating volley from British and Allied troops led by General Maitland and General Adam. The shock of this unexpected resistance broke the Guard's momentum. When the Middle Guard finally retreated, the myth of the invincible Imperial Guard was shattered, a psychological blow to the French army. Collapse of the French army, 8 p.m. and beyond. The failure of the Imperial Guard marked the turning point. Seeing the Guard retreat, something that had never happened before, sent panic through the rest of the French army. Soldiers began to flee the battlefield, and the once mighty Army du Nord dissolved into chaos. Wellington, seizing the moment, ordered a general advance across the line. By 8:30 p.m., the Prussians had fully engaged on Napoleon's right flank, crushing any hopes of regrouping. As night fell, the French army was in full retreat, with Napoleon himself narrowly escaping capture. This catastrophic defeat marked the end of his reign and the Napoleonic era in European history. The Battle of Waterloo was not only a clash of armies, but also a confrontation between three of the most influential military leaders of the 19th century. Each commander brought unique experiences, styles of leadership, and strategic approaches that shaped the course of the battle. The decisions they made, both before and during the engagement, determined the fate of their armies and the future of Europe. The battle became a testament to their personal abilities, their understanding of warfare, and their capacity to inspire and command vast numbers of soldiers under extreme pressure. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of the French. Napoleon Bonaparte, the charismatic and ambitious ruler of France, was the driving force behind the Napoleonic Wars. By 1815, he was already recognized as one of history's most brilliant military minds, having achieved a series of remarkable victories across Europe. However, at Waterloo, he faced a formidable coalition, and the weight of his past successes created both strengths and weaknesses in his leadership. Napoleon's strategic genius lay in his ability to combine speed, surprise, and concentration of force. His preferred method was to strike quickly, split his enemies apart, and defeat them in detail before they could unite. This strategy had brought him victories at Austerlitz, 1805, and Jena Auerstedt, 1806. At Waterloo, he sought to replicate this formula by attacking the Anglo-Allied and Prussian armies before they could combine forces against him. However, by 1815, Napoleon was no longer at the peak of his powers. He was 46 years old and physically unwell, reportedly suffering from stomach pain and fatigue during the battle. This affected his ability to lead with the same relentless energy that had defined his earlier campaigns. Unlike his previous battles where he was present on the front lines, at Waterloo, Napoleon remained further back, relying heavily on his marshals to execute his orders. This distant command style led to critical miscommunications and delays. One of Napoleon's most significant errors was his reliance on Marshal Grouchy to pursue and prevent the Prussians from reinforcing Wellington. Grouchy's failure to block the Prussians allowed Blücher's forces to arrive at a decisive moment in the battle, ultimately turning the tide. Additionally, Napoleon underestimated the resilience of Wellington's defensive tactics and misjudged the effectiveness of Ney's cavalry charges, which were launched prematurely and without adequate infantry support. Despite these mistakes, Napoleon's ability to inspire loyalty remained unparalleled. His soldiers, particularly the Imperial Guard, viewed him with devotion, and his presence on the battlefield gave them a sense of invincibility. When he personally led the Imperial Guard in their final assault, many believed that victory was still within reach. However, when the Guard was repelled, it shattered the myth of Napoleon's invincibility, leading to the disintegration of the French army. The Duke of Wellington, the master of defense. Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, was Napoleon's chief opponent at Waterloo and a commander renowned for his defensive mastery. Having earned his reputation during the Peninsular War, 1808 to 1814, against Napoleon's marshals in Spain and Portugal, Wellington was known for his meticulous planning, calm demeanor under fire, and ability to adapt to the conditions of the battlefield. Wellington's leadership at Waterloo was characterized by his careful use of terrain. He deliberately chose the Mont Saint-Jean Ridge, a position that allowed his army to remain partially hidden on the reverse slope. This shielded his troops from the devastating effects of French artillery while allowing them to deliver surprise volleys when the French advanced. This tactic had served him well in the Iberian Peninsula, and at Waterloo, it played a decisive role in blunting Napoleon's repeated assaults. Wellington's ability to maintain discipline under intense pressure was another hallmark of his leadership. Throughout the day, as the French launched wave after wave of attacks on his position, Wellington remained composed and focused. He personally oversaw critical parts of the battle, including the defense of Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte, both of which were crucial to maintaining his lines. His coolness under fire and his reassuring presence bolstered the morale of his troops during the most desperate moments. A key element of Wellington's strategy was his coordination with the Prussians. Though his army was outnumbered and under constant attack, Wellington's objective was to hold the line until Blücher's forces arrived. His confidence in the Anglo-Allied army's ability to withstand the French onslaught, combined with his reliance on Prussian reinforcements, demonstrated his strategic patience and foresight. Despite his defensive orientation, Wellington was not afraid to seize the initiative when the opportunity arose. When he saw the Imperial Guard retreating, he immediately ordered a general advance, which broke the French army's spirit and triggered their collapse. His leadership at Waterloo solidified his legacy as one of Britain's greatest military commanders and the man who finally defeated Napoleon on the battlefield. Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, the unyielding Prussian. Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, the commander of the Prussian army, played a decisive and often underappreciated role in the Battle of Waterloo. An experienced soldier known for his aggressive tactics and personal bravery, Blücher had fought against Napoleon during the Wars of Liberation and was determined to see the French emperor defeated once and for all. Blücher's leadership style contrasted with the calculated caution of Wellington and the intellectual brilliance of Napoleon. He was a bold, energetic leader who inspired his troops through sheer force of will. Despite being 72 years old at the time of the battle and having been injured at Ligny just 2 days prior, Blücher refused to withdraw from the campaign. His decision to march toward Waterloo after the defeat at Ligny was one of the most pivotal moments of the campaign. Blücher's coordination with Wellington was based on a mutual understanding of the importance of cooperation. While Napoleon believed the Prussians would retreat toward Germany after Ligny, Blücher instead directed his army toward Wavre, keeping them within striking distance of Wellington's forces. This decision ultimately allowed him to bring over 50,000 Prussian soldiers onto the battlefield, tipping the balance in favor of the coalition. During the battle itself, Blücher's arrival on Napoleon's right flank around 4:30 p.m. placed immense pressure on the already strained French army. Despite facing fierce resistance in the village of Plancenoit, the Prussians continued to press forward. Their presence forced Napoleon to divert his elite reserves away from the main battle, weakening his assaults on Wellington's center. Blücher's leadership was marked by his relentlessness. He would not allow his army to rest until Napoleon was defeated. His determination to reach Wellington's position in time, despite the challenges of terrain and exhaustion, ensured that the Seventh Coalition could deliver the final blow against Napoleon's ambitions. Other key figures. Marshal Michel Ney, Napoleon's most trusted battlefield commander. At Waterloo, Ney led the cavalry charges, but his lack of coordination with infantry and artillery resulted in disastrous losses. The Battle of Waterloo was fought using the military technology and tactics characteristic of the Napoleonic Wars, a period marked by the use of muskets, cannons, cavalry, and tight battlefield formations. It was a clash between two military traditions, Napoleon's aggressive, fast-moving style and Wellington's calculated, defensive approach. Each side relied on specific weapons and battlefield maneuvers, and the interaction of these elements determined the outcome of the conflict. Understanding the weapons and tactics used at Waterloo reveals how strategy and technology combined to shape the battle's bloody course. 1. Infantry weapons and formations. At the heart of both the French and Allied armies was the infantry, soldiers who fought primarily on foot. The most common weapon was the smoothbore musket, which had a range of approximately 100 yards and could be fired 2 to 3 times per minute by a well-trained soldier. Both sides relied on muskets to deliver mass volleys, large, synchronized bursts of fire that could devastate advancing enemy units. The French Charleville musket. Napoleon's infantry was equipped with a .69 caliber Charleville musket, a reliable but slow-to-reload weapon. French soldiers, known as line infantry, often advanced in column formation, a tactic designed to strike hard and fast against enemy lines. While this formation allowed rapid movement across the battlefield, it exposed the soldiers' flanks and made them vulnerable to artillery and musket fire. The British Brown Bess musket. Wellington's Anglo-Allied army relied on the .75 caliber Brown Bess musket, famous for its durability and power. British infantry favored line formation, where soldiers stood in 2 or 3 ranks, maximizing firepower and accuracy. This formation was particularly effective at repelling French assaults, as demonstrated during the cavalry charges at Waterloo. A critical aspect of the infantry's effectiveness lay in discipline and training. Wellington's forces were known for their ability to deliver controlled, repeated volleys, a devastating tactic when French columns came within range. This firepower advantage was particularly important during the defense of La Haye-Sainte and the final repulse of the Imperial Guard. 2. Artillery, the backbone of Napoleonic warfare. Artillery played a central role in the Battle of Waterloo. Both armies deployed field cannons, howitzers, and mortars, which were capable of inflicting massive casualties over long distances. Artillery was used not only to soften enemy positions, but also to disrupt formations and break morale. French artillery, the Gris-Beauvais system. Napoleon's artillery was among the best in Europe, thanks to the Gris-Beauvais system, which standardized the size and design of cannons. The French Grand Battery, positioned on the ridge opposite Wellington's center, unleashed devastating barrages throughout the battle. These cannons fired round shot, canister, and explosive shells, aiming to break the Anglo-Allied defensive line. British and Prussian artillery. Wellington's army, though smaller in artillery numbers, used position batteries effectively to counter French advances. British 9-pounder cannons inflicted heavy losses on Ney's cavalry, while Prussian artillery added pressure on Napoleon's right flank as they advanced through Plancenoit. Artillery tactics at Waterloo reflected Napoleon's offensive approach, using massed firepower to weaken enemy lines, while Wellington used artillery defensively, targeting key positions to hold the ridge. Artillery inflicted thousands of casualties, particularly during the French cavalry charges and the Imperial Guard's final assault. 3. Cavalry, shock, and mobility. Cavalry units, composed of horse-mounted soldiers, played a dynamic and dramatic role at Waterloo. Cavalry were used for scouting, flanking maneuvers, and shock charges, sudden attacks meant to break enemy formations. The battle saw the deployment of 3 main types of cavalry. Heavy cavalry, armed with sabers and lances. Heavy cavalry, such as the French cuirassiers and British household cavalry, were used for direct charges against infantry and other cavalry. Light cavalry, used for reconnaissance, harassment, and pursuit. Light cavalry like hussars and chasseurs were faster and more agile. Dragoons. These soldiers could fight on horseback or dismount to act as infantry, offering versatility on the battlefield. One of the most famous moments in the battle came when Marshal Ney ordered mass cavalry charges against Wellington's center. Over 12,000 French cavalrymen surged forward, believing the Allied line was crumbling. However, Wellington had prepared for this. His infantry formed squares, a defensive formation with bayonets pointing outward. This tactic proved devastatingly effective, as the French cavalry could not penetrate the squares and were exposed to musket and artillery fire. 4. Defensive tactics, the use of terrain and strong points. A defining feature of Wellington's strategy was his masterful use of terrain. He chose the Mont Saint-Jean Ridge deliberately, positioning his forces on the reverse slope, a tactic that hid his men from French artillery and protected them from direct fire. Key strongpoints like Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte were heavily fortified and held by elite units. These positions became focal points of intense combat. Hougoumont, defended by British guards, this farm absorbed repeated French assaults throughout the day. Its resistance tied down thousands of French soldiers, weakening Napoleon's main thrust. La Haye-Sainte, held by the King's German Legion, this farmhouse guarded Wellington's center. After intense fighting, it fell to the French, but the delay it caused was crucial. 5. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's final gamble. Napoleon's Imperial Guard represented the elite of his army. These battle-hardened veterans were his last reserve, intended to deliver the decisive blow. Late in the battle, Napoleon committed the Old Guard in a desperate attempt to break Wellington's line. The Old Guard, marching with immense confidence, advanced toward the Anglo-Allied center. Wellington, anticipating this move, had hidden fresh reserves behind the ridge. As the Guard crested the hill, they were met with devastating musket volleys from British guards under General Maitland. The shock of this unexpected resistance broke their momentum, and when the middle guard retreated, the French morale collapsed. The Battle of Waterloo demonstrated how the balance of weapons and tactics, infantry formations, artillery firepower, cavalry mobility, and defensive ingenuity could shape the outcome of a battle. Each side employed a mix of traditional and innovative approaches, but it was Wellington's defensive brilliance combined with Blücher's timely intervention that ultimately turned the tide against Napoleon. The Battle of Waterloo was not just a contest of military strategy and leadership, it was also profoundly influenced by the terrain and weather conditions. The physical geography of the battlefield and the impact of heavy rain in the hours leading up to the battle played a decisive role in shaping the movements of the armies, the effectiveness of their weapons, and ultimately the outcome of the conflict. Both Napoleon and Wellington had to adapt their strategies to the natural environment, and their ability, or inability, to do so significantly affected their chances of success. 1. The battlefield layout, a defensive advantage. The location of the Battle of Waterloo, near the small village of Mont Saint-Jean in present-day Belgium, was carefully chosen by the Duke of Wellington. His defensive mindset led him to select ground that offered natural advantages, which would enable his numerically inferior army to hold against Napoleon's aggressive tactics. The battlefield was centered on a gently sloping ridge that ran east to west. This Mont Saint-Jean ridge formed a natural defensive line where Wellington deployed most of his Anglo-Allied forces. The ridge provided two key advantages. Concealment. Wellington's troops could be positioned on the reverse slope, the side facing away from the French lines. This meant that Napoleon's artillery had limited visibility and effectiveness against Wellington's forces, as the trajectory of the cannonballs was disrupted by the incline. Protection. The ridge shielded the infantry from direct fire and allowed Wellington to reinforce weak points without exposing his reserves to the enemy. French forces advancing uphill were exhausted by the time they reached the Allied lines, reducing the impact of their attacks. Along the ridge, 3 strategic strongpoints played a vital role in the battle. Hougoumont, a large walled farm on Wellington's right flank, which became the scene of ferocious combat throughout the day. It anchored the Allied position and absorbed thousands of French soldiers, weakening Napoleon's central assault. La Haye-Sainte, located in the center of the battlefield, this farmhouse was held by the King's German Legion and served as a forward strongpoint. Its capture by the French late in the battle briefly threatened Wellington's line, but did not break it. Pays-Plate and La Haye, these farms on the left flank were held by Prussian forces and served as the link between Wellington's army and Blücher's advancing reinforcements. Their defense delayed Napoleon's attempt to outflank the Allies. The French position, by contrast, was on lower ground south of the ridge. This gave them clear fields of fire, but forced their troops to advance uphill, a significant disadvantage. This unfavorable position, combined with the muddy conditions, made it difficult for the French to execute the swift and decisive attacks that Napoleon favored. 2. The impact of weather, mud, and delays. The weather in the days leading up to June 18, 1815, played a crucial role in the battle. On the night of June 17th, a severe thunderstorm drenched the battlefield, turning the fields into a muddy quagmire. This seemingly minor factor had far-reaching consequences for both armies. For Napoleon, the rain delayed the start of the battle. He believed in the shock value of rapid, decisive strikes, but the wet ground made it impossible to move his artillery into position quickly. His famous Grand Battery, intended to pulverize Wellington's center, was less effective because the soft ground absorbed the cannonballs rather than allowing them to bounce through enemy lines. As a result, delayed attack. Napoleon did not launch his first assault until around 11:30 a.m., several hours later than planned. This delay allowed Prussian reinforcements under Blücher to approach the battlefield and contribute to Napoleon's defeat. Weakened cavalry charges. The heavy mud also hindered the French cavalry, which played a key role in Napoleon's strategy. When Marshal Ney ordered his mass cavalry charges, the horses struggled to gallop through the mud, reducing the impact and speed of their attacks. Wellington's infantry, safely formed in defensive squares, was able to repel the French cavalry without breaking. For Wellington, the muddy conditions were both a blessing and a curse. While the rain made it harder for Napoleon to deliver his trademark rapid assaults, it also weakened the defensive structures of strongpoints like La Haye-Sainte, which eventually fell to the French. Nevertheless, the reverse slope and the protection of the ridge remained effective in shielding his forces from much of the artillery bombardment. 3. How terrain shaped tactical decisions. Throughout the battle, the terrain dictated the tactical decisions of both sides. Wellington's use of the ridge to shield his forces was a textbook example of defensive warfare. His ability to hold key positions while waiting for the Prussians to arrive relied on controlling the high ground and using natural barriers to slow the French advance. Napoleon's aggressive tactics, on the other hand, were hampered by the battlefield's geography. He could not easily outflank Wellington due to the farms on either side and the arrival of Blücher's Prussians from the east. Instead, he was forced to rely on frontal assaults, which played into Wellington's strengths. Key tactical adaptations to the terrain included square formations. To counter repeated French cavalry attacks, Wellington's infantry formed squares, a tight, defensive formation with bayonets facing outward. The mud made it difficult for the French horses to break these squares, turning Ney's cavalry charges into costly failures. Artillery placement. Napoleon's Grand Battery was placed on higher ground to maximize its range, but the mud absorbed much of the force of the cannonballs. Meanwhile, Wellington's carefully positioned artillery on the ridge was able to deliver devastating volleys when the French advanced uphill. Strongpoint battles. The fight for Hougoumont exemplified how fortified positions could absorb and exhaust enemy forces. Despite repeated assaults, the British defenders held the farm throughout the day, preventing a French breakthrough on Wellington's right flank. 4. The Prussian advance and the terrain's role. The arrival of the Prussians under Field Marshal Blücher was facilitated by the terrain east of the battlefield. Despite the muddy roads, the Prussian army moved steadily toward Plancenoit, a village that became the site of fierce fighting in the late afternoon. This maneuver placed Napoleon's right flank under intense pressure, forcing him to divert troops away from the main battle and weakening his final attacks on Wellington's center. Blücher's forces navigated wooded areas and rolling hills, using the cover to conceal their advance until they were close enough to strike. This surprise movement, enabled by the terrain, sealed Napoleon's fate by cutting off his escape route and breaking his right flank. The combined effects of terrain and weather were decisive at Waterloo. Wellington's skillful use of high ground and defensive positions, combined with the delays caused by rain and mud, prevented Napoleon from executing his lightning-fast tactics. As the day wore on and Prussian reinforcements arrived, these natural elements became critical in shaping the outcome of the Napoleonic War's final and most decisive battle. The Prussian army, under the command of Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, played a decisive and pivotal role in the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo. Without their timely arrival and persistent pressure, The combined Anglo-Allied forces under the Duke of Wellington may not have been able to withstand Napoleon's relentless assaults. The cooperation between Wellington and Blücher, although conducted under extreme wartime pressures and through challenging circumstances, ultimately led to Napoleon's defeat and the end of his 100 Days campaign. 1. The Prussian defeat at Ligny, the prelude to Waterloo. 2 days before the Battle of Waterloo, on June 16, 1815, Napoleon achieved a tactical victory over the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny. This battle was part of Napoleon's strategy to divide and conquer, to prevent Wellington and Blücher from joining forces and defeating his smaller army. Though the French won the field at Ligny, it came at a high cost in casualties and resources. Despite their loss, the Prussians executed a disciplined retreat under General August von Gneisenau, Blücher's chief of staff. Crucially, instead of retreating eastward toward their supply bases, as Napoleon expected, they withdrew northwest toward Wavre, positioning themselves to support Wellington if needed. This decision was strategic and deliberate, ensuring that the Prussians would remain within striking distance of the Anglo-Allied forces. Napoleon assumed the Prussians were no longer an immediate threat, but Blücher was determined to return to the battlefield and fulfill his promise to Wellington that "we shall be there." This mutual commitment was vital to the eventual Allied victory. 2. The Prussian march to Waterloo, overcoming obstacles. The night before the Battle of Waterloo was marked by severe rain and muddy terrain, which made movement difficult for all armies. For the Prussians, the conditions were especially challenging as they had to cover nearly 20 miles, 32 kilometers, from Wavre to Waterloo, through soaked fields and dense woods. The march was an extraordinary feat of logistics and endurance. Blücher, despite being injured after falling from his horse at Ligny, was determined to reach Wellington in time. His officers, particularly Gneisenau, played a crucial role in maintaining discipline and momentum among the troops. Blücher organized his forces into 3 columns to speed the advance. As the Prussians pushed forward, they encountered French rearguard forces under Marshal Grouchy, who had been ordered by Napoleon to pursue and prevent their intervention. However, Grouchy's pursuit was slow and ineffective, allowing the main Prussian force to slip past and continue toward Waterloo. 3. The arrival at Waterloo, a turning point. By mid-afternoon on June 18th, as Napoleon's main assaults raged against Wellington's center, the first Prussian units began arriving on the eastern flank of the battlefield. The advance guard, led by General Friedrich von Bülow, targeted the village of Plancenoit, a key position protecting Napoleon's right flank and supply lines. The arrival of the Prussians placed immense pressure on Napoleon's forces, forcing him to divert troops away from the main battle. While Wellington struggled to hold the ridge, Napoleon had to commit young conscripts and elite Imperial Guard units to counter the Prussian threat. This division of resources weakened Napoleon's main offensive, reducing the pressure on Wellington's defensive lines. The battle for Plancenoit was fierce and prolonged. Prussian troops initially captured the village, but Napoleon counterattacked with his young guard, retaking the position temporarily. However, Blücher's relentless assaults eventually overwhelmed the French defenders, forcing Napoleon to commit his veteran Old Guard to hold the line. The fierce combat in Plancenoit further sapped Napoleon's reserves and morale. 4. Coordinated pressure, breaking Napoleon's army. As the afternoon wore on, the combined Anglo-Allied and Prussian forces exerted synchronized pressure from both the west and east. Wellington's line, though stretched and battered, held firm while the Prussians intensified their attacks on Napoleon's right flank. By 7 p.m., with Plancenoit falling and Prussian reinforcements arriving in greater numbers, the French army was outflanked and outnumbered. Napoleon's once organized battle lines began to disintegrate under this two-pronged assault. The Prussians, energized by Blücher's leadership, pursued the retreating French forces with relentless aggression, ensuring Napoleon had no opportunity to regroup. The presence of the Prussian army had a psychological impact on the battlefield as well. For the French, the sight of enemy reinforcements crushed any remaining hope of victory. For Wellington's exhausted troops, the appearance of Prussian banners marked a turning point, renewing their resolve to hold out. 5. The final pursuit. The Prussians seal the victory. As Napoleon's Imperial Guard was repelled and his lines collapsed, it was the Prussian forces that led the final pursuit of the fleeing French army. While Wellington's army remained on the battlefield to secure the position, Blücher ordered an aggressive chase, ensuring that Napoleon's retreat turned into a rout. Prussian cavalry and light infantry pursued the disorganized French, cutting down fleeing soldiers and capturing stragglers. This ruthless pursuit prevented Napoleon from reorganizing and marked the end of his military career. The destruction of the French army at Waterloo would lead directly to Napoleon's abdication and the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. Blücher's role in the pursuit was personal as well as professional. He was determined to see Napoleon defeated completely, remembering the suffering inflicted on Prussia during earlier campaigns. His unwavering commitment to Wellington and his aggressive tactics in the final hours sealed the French defeat. The Prussian army's intervention at Waterloo was not only a military achievement, but a testament to the power of coalition warfare. The coordination between Wellington and Blücher, despite their different styles of leadership, showcased how Allied cooperation could overcome even the greatest general of the age. Without the Prussian advance and their tenacious fighting, the outcome of Waterloo may have been very different.